at the very end, they do come to Rhode Island and have a trip to New York, and it's been like this every year. Are you guys speaking and eyes to go by? You could just talk to us a little bit more.
I think the basic structure of the program has sort of core components of it. The desire to create that sort of environment in which people can live with one another. How's that? Yeah? Okay. I think the kind of basic core ingredients of the program have been not fixed, but they've been consistent with the course of the program. And they're the basic core ingredients of what we do. Residency kind of central parts of the program. And those have to do, there is critique, there's trying to look at things as a certain amount of technical discussion. Still?
Microphone. Can you use microphone?
Yeah, hand him the mic, please.
How's that? No. Still no? How's that?
Still.
Hey! Are we good?
Yeah.
Okay. I was just saying the core kind of central components of what we do at RISD are basically what we kind of use as starting points in thinking about how this was going to work. And the things have definitely evolved over time and tweaks over the years for sure. But I think there are things like that were new to a lot of us, like how do we use a kind of online component to the program to keep in touch with the fellows when we are in the U.S. Because I think that's a really important distinction in what we're doing, is that we're not here full time. It's not like we're professors at a school here, but it's also not something where we're kind of parachuting in for 1 week and doing some stuff and then leaving. And so there have been kind of additions, certainly changing proportions and ratios of how we deliver what kinds of content over time. Absolutely.
And I think just to kind of explain the structure for those who don't know it, the SEED program is made up of something that we call the teaching weeks. So 4 times a year the faculty fly over and spend 1 week each time from Sunday to Thursday, 9 to 5 in the studios with the fellows. And there they conduct sessions such as like lecture type sessions as well as workshops and give them prompts for them to work from. And then there's the online component, which takes place throughout the year for 10 months, starting November through the end of August. And that has almost bi-weekly prompts and journal keeping that they have to basically follow. And then there's this trip to the US in which we go in kind of the mid towards end of May to Providence in Rhode Island to visit the school, and then spend some time in New York, and then go back to Providence to engage in intensive 2-day workshops, and then at the end of that have critiques as well. So those are kind of the main components that make up the program.
After with that said, I'm curious to know before we move on to the activities, curious to understand that what would you say within the residency program was a moment that you felt kind of broke the routine in your artwork and has allowed you to reach to that level of feeling ready to apply for your master's at your MFA and then what's going on to RISD for your MFA? What part of the program was that? Was it during workshops? Was it pre-critique? Or obviously the communication between you and your peers?
I think but I honestly think again and again, I mean, everything that SEED focuses on, the number one element that is important in the driver for SEED's program is community. And I think this is the most important thing that actually made me feel like I want to go and have even a stronger encounter with an artist community. And the fact that we did have studios for the first time at the same program, that was new to us. We didn't have that during university, undergraduate in the UAE, but this was sort of, in a way, introduced to us through the CEF program. And it allows you to, as an artist, like, have a consistent practice, which is normal outside of the UAE, but we're learning, we're evolving, we're developing these programs. And I think, I always say that the CEF program sort of gives you a taste of something and then gives you wanting more. And having those studios, working with my peers consistently, and the work developed, starting having more cohesive concepts, ideas, and then we wanted to have more skills, and that's what sort of pushed me to apply to Residency and actually go to skills back.
With that said, understanding the importance of space, I'd like to move to you, Valeria, and if you could perhaps just talk us through Crossway Foundation and Culture Rentals. I'd like to take a look at understanding how space also participates in that dynamic, and of course, if you do have these regular professors that are coming in, like with the Shalama Foundation, or if you don't, why is that? What is the dynamic to look at between artists?
So just to put it in the Crossway Foundation into context, we're a London-based charity delivering arts and education initiatives for young people across the Middle East and the UK. So the aim is to sort of connect these young people across borders, and we believe this is increasingly important and quite often sort of divided society. So with that said, one of our main initiatives is our Journeys program, where we coordinate a 2-week kind of intensive cross-cultural trip that brings young creators from one country or several countries to another. And these journeys are not only physical, so from one place to another, but also personal. They're sort of time for self-development and growth. So yeah, these trips usually last around 2 weeks, and they are for about 6 to 12 people, I think is the maximum. And on those trips, we they're very carefully curated programs, and as Chindi will be able to tell you, I don't think there's a minute that's not accounted for. But during the trips, there's sort of the more traditional activities such as artist talks, studio visits, gallery visits, portfolio reviews, and then slightly more perhaps unusual activities, depending really on where we are in the world. So the trips have taken place in Japan, Brazil, Spain, Turkey. So for example, in Japan, we took part in a tea ceremony, we did a one-film making workshop, Uto, which is a type of Japanese dance theatre, and in Brazil we did capoeira, percussion workshops. So it's really about sort of not only the sort of traditional kind of sort of academic side of the arts, but it's also about exploring the culture that we're in. And you were saying about space, and I think that's a really, really important part of these trips. So a lot of these artists come on these trips with an idea of sort of what they want to do, and they realise actually it's really 2 weeks for them to have time to reflect on what they're doing, to connect with other young artists. As Chinky says, get more confused about what they're doing because we throw so many questions. Really kind of try and take them out of their comfort zones.
What drives you to choose these cities or these countries? What is the tie? Is it something to do with the artist practice? Do you choose the artist first and then the city, or is it vice versa?
No, so we choose the country first, and that's dependent on many different things, but the more recent trips have been, it's really been connected to what's been going on around us. So in 2016 we went to the US, and that was a trip across Texas and New Mexico at a time when Trump was sort of about to be elected, and that was bringing a group of Arab artists to explore this sort of Southwest American. And the year before that we had a trip to Turkey where we were exploring migration, and so it's kind of, it's very dependent, but the artists are chosen afterwards, and yeah, so they're not chosen.
Jimmy, perhaps you can talk to us a little bit more about Japan.
Yeah, I'm not sure if this works. Anyways, so I was lucky. I've been to 2 trips so far. Because the first trip to Japan was the first journey I went, but the last journey to America was just 2 nights. So somehow it just felt like a year, 1 year after another. So the Japan trip, actually, like, I tried applying to Korotsui a year before Japan. It was a journey to Brazil, but somehow I couldn't join that trip. And so the Japan trip finally got, like, because of the processes, like, you submit, there's like a competition. So I submitted a small documentary about the effects of Japanese cartoons in the Middle East, and got picked up. I got a call, an email, went to an interview, and I think the list just went down to 8 eventually. And the journey was an intense 2 weeks, and I didn't know anyone, but I knew a couple of the artists, like, from social media. Just meeting them in person itself is another journey, because you get to know their way of seeing your work, because they've been seeing, let's say, work online or knowing about you, so you see a different angle completely, and then seeing an angle from, let's say, the artist you meet in Japan. So that itself was before Japan I knew what I wanted to do, but after Japan I figured, wait, there's a bigger story to this, not like just a straightforward piece kind of work.
So how do you fulfill or satisfy that continuing, this is a question for both sides. I think one thing that is quite incredible that picks up almost naturally is a sense of the creation of collaboration amongst artists, and the idea of collectives also, they just naturally kind of arise through spending so much time with each other in traveling, in studio spaces, in sea, and so what have you guys seen come out of this as artists, or even ideas or narratives that are specific, certain styles? Because I feel like, with the Japan team that went alongside, I feel like even aesthetically there's something that connects all of you, and I find it really interesting that there's, you guys didn't know each other, you didn't know any of them ahead of time. So, I mean, if you could talk about that, the idea of community would be great. I know we have some slides.
Well, for Japan, I don't think we didn't have that much time to collaborate, but me and my friend Mid, she was one of a photographer, did like a quick shoot, and when she went back to Kuwait, she presented the pictures, and I think the pictures were so, it's like the first pictures before she even arrived to the show, so that's that was a success. But the other form of collaboration we had is just like, everyone's just supporting the other from different countries, like the WhatsApp group still runs, and this happens. Even other artists who never came to the same trip, kind of we have this relationship. For example, I met Tulip who went to the Brazil trip after I came back from Japan, and we already talked about our separate trips, but there's something familiar to both.
Yeah, so I just put together a few photographs from the trips just to get an idea of the kind of activities we do. But in terms of, I think this idea of a network and creating a network of alumni is really important. It's a really important aspect of what we do, and that it's not just the collaboration on the trips, but it's about planting those seeds on the trips that then can turn into collaborations, both with, as Shimi said, people who've been on your trip, but also our network as a whole, to know that we're a family, that we're there to support you. And that's a huge part of our role as well, is to make sure that they do feel supported afterwards, and that it's not just a 2-week journey, and that we're constantly sort of feeding them with opportunities. I think from perspective of and I'll let Afra maybe talk more about what happens in the group and how do they continue to stay in touch or support one another after. But from our perspective, from the Residency's perspective and the Slamah Foundation's perspective, what we're interested in knowing is what are the effects of once people graduate the program? What happens in the community in the UAE? Because that's the reason why the program started, is to try and develop that ecosystem of arts in the UAE and see any results from the education they receive at sea. And so some of the most interesting things, and I'll give some examples, is for example, from year 1, from the first cohort, both Afra and Asma went on to do their MFAs, as well as Farah al-Qasmi and Walid al-Wawi. And coming back, Asma is now teaching and is actually starting the textiles department at Zayed University. And Afra is about to also start teaching at Zayed University. Ali Hussein Luta, we knew from the time she was at sea that she was really interested in doing something for her community and affecting the community through arts. And so she just recently, about 6 months ago, opened up an arts community center in Dubai called Mida, which is for children to engage in arts. And then, we look at also people, for example, working at the Department of Culture and Tourism here in Abu Dhabi. And if you just look next door at the education center, they have the 3 artist studios are occupied by SEEF alums. So it's really beautiful to see these people kind of leave SEEF and then start to implement the learnings and start educating and start practicing full-time as artists. And I don't know if I should be saying this or not, but one of the things we've noticed happen a lot is people quitting their jobs after participating in SEEF. And I apologize if there are any people here who have suffered that as a result. But I think it's just a sign to show you that, once you taste what it means to have a sustained practice and to have a studio and to have a community that supports you and receive critique that really takes your work to the next or through the next leap, it's difficult not to be engaged in that. It's difficult to have a very corporate, typical job. And so I think it's wonderful to have a place like the Department of Culture and Tourism that can employ artists and support them through their practice, because that will just make them better at the job that they're doing as full-time employees.
That's another form of learning between artists. You can't sit in your studio and make work without showing it to people, without having feedback, without having discussions about it, and expect to have a breakthrough or drum groups.
So how do you lead that? I feel something that is maybe I look at things with a very critical lens, and I feel I start to believe that there's so much that different institutions and different platforms can do. So where is the role of the artists, both to you and Timothy, when it comes to this yearning of, say, critique or discussions or readings? How do you, map that out so that you are the leaders for that, or other art professionals are the leaders for that come in, and it really begins to instill that sense of grassroots that that is the first push that both culture runners and Crossway Foundation and SEEF are doing. They push and then they allow for that continuity to continue to take place through other opportunities and experiences, but then outside of that, what is it that's being done? Behind closed doors, what are the discussions like?
There's so many artists that don't know if there is these opportunities around the region. So just through WhatsApp or the internet, connecting people.
It's a really interesting question from my perspective, because what you're talking about is how you move from a kind of inorganic or institutional model for creation of artists communities to an organic model for creation of artists communities. And that's something that the C faculty mentors are I think, kind of, we're constantly talking about how our job is to make ourselves obsolete, and I think that's something we're very committed to, is this functions as a sort of, a model and a kind of way of posing a set of questions that we can carry forward out of there. But then, of course, things like spaces, and there's a certain amount of infrastructure that needs to exist there. But I think that that transition, and even starting to watch that transition happen now, has been really encouraging and fascinating. It's happening at a speed that you would never see where we come from. And it's there's a well-known critic who in the US who talks about how even in the sort of best grad programs in the fine arts, the students, of course, learn a certain amount of those classes, but really that they learn from one another in the middle of the night, hallways between their studios and that sort of thing. And that's really, we just had with our most recent cohort for the first time this past week, and at the end of the week, somebody was asking, well, what are the hours of the studios? And just the idea that the studio would be 24 hours is sort of contrary to what we know is. So, yeah, I'm encouraged to continue investing in what happens over there.
And just to kind of pick up on that, and just add one more thing, is that it's the artists, I think, that we've experienced definitely have that urge and want to continue to have those conversations. But as Kevin said, there's a need for at least certain infrastructure to be in place. And I believe that will come, and it will happen, definitely. But within the SEEP studios, for instance, as graduates graduate the class, we still open up the spaces for them. The SEEP studios are still open for the alumni. We actually have the third floor of the place we occupy is dedicated for the alumni. And the studios are open 24/7 for them to come to, as well as for the current cohorts. And what we love to see, actually what we have loved seeing recently, is sometimes some of the past SEEP fellows, the alums coming into the space, and if they have a piece of work that they're working on, they would actually make it in the SEEP studios. And then you see that intergenerational interactions happening. We have Wa'afraء recently was in the studio for a while before the current cohort started, and she was working on an installation. Before that, we had someone in the studio while the last cohort were about to graduate, working on prints. And so it's nice to see them kind of having those conversations between the alumni as well as the current classes in the program.
We've also we've also seen a kind of amazing generational thing that's built with, after the first cohort, we started asking fellows for recommendations for applications for the following year. It's been kind of amazing to see.
The alumni of these programs. Is there any sort of idea for you guys to maybe perhaps all come together, have a platform, like a shared platform, which bridges, say SEEF alums with culture runners, with, Crossway Foundation? And I think that's, even if it's just an online platform for the discussions that you were talking about, Chindi, via WhatsApp, to just take place so that you begin to understand what that network of thinkers looks like, and it could be a closed space, but I thought that I would ask this question now that it comes up.
Yeah, I think that's a really good kind of suggestion, because we do have now, after 9 years of doing this work, we have a network of around just over 100 alumni, and they're all sort of very connected to us, and we really keep them updated. But I think it would be really interesting to share. And we've seen a few of our alumni go on to the SEEF program, and really seen them kind of flourish and develop in their practice. So I think that would be a very valuable resource personally to try and see that kind of collaboration. That's our work is all about collaborating as much as possible, because I think that's the best way to get anything done.
I mean, I certainly hadn't thought about that, so thank you, Munira, for coming up with that idea. We were actually, this year, so this current year is the 5th year for the SEEF program. So it's just about the right time for us to basically, where we've started looking back and thinking about how do we want to capture the past 5 years? How do we want to share that with the public? So we're actually in the process of creating a microsite for SEEF, where dialogue will also be happening, but we had always envisioned it kind of dialogue between the public and the SEEF alumni. But I think that there's definitely an opportunity for at least an online platform, which is kind of, you know, the easiest thing to do these days, to connect these different programs and artists who have participated in them. And if you talk about something, even if it's kind of closed off or private, the online component for SEEF has kind of a blogs aspect to it, where it's you access it by basically a username and a password. And I don't see why something similar can't exist basically for a larger group of emerging artists within the UAE, but possibly at least the GCC countries in the region as well.
Absolutely. I definitely am a constant advocate of this idea of a network, because the moment that you have a network is the moment that you have a backbone, and the moment that you have a backbone is the moment that you can just really stand tall and stand strong and really begin to engage in conversations and present yourself as you know, subdivisions, fair enough, with different identities, but also as a whole to a degree, you know, and it all comes together quite nicely, and you know, it starts to counter the general narrative of that there isn't much going on in the region, you know, like how can we come in and instigate this thought. But the moment that you have, and you know, the future is in the hands of the emerging thinkers, the emerging artists, curators, historians, so on. So the moment that you can introduce these people and allow them to really work together, work the ground together until they find that whatever platform it is that they need, then you begin to extend. I feel like it's, you know, that is the first step forward, but then you have to, you know, you have to build the bridge across each different various platform. With that said, I would like to open up the floor to any questions, and of course, if you guys have any more comments, we can continue.
Thank you for the talk. I'm Susie Sikorsky, and I wanted to know, I mean, I really researched on like the local art communities here between different generations, and Khulud, I had the pleasure of kind of touring the space in the summer, and I wanted to know within the past 5 years of maybe like that difference between maybe established and emerging artists, like is there a fine line that you notice between artists that maybe have a bit more representation or are a bit older in age? Like is there, maybe you can comment on the dialogue between people of different ages that maybe are someone who's just graduating from college and someone who's 20 years older, I don't know, I mean, could you comment on that?
Sure, definitely. Thank you for asking that question, Susie. I think what we've seen in the SEEF program, it's interesting kind of how do you define, you know, an emerging artist? Is it by age? Is it the practice? And we've certainly seen a very diverse age group in the SEEF program. And that's actually one of the things we look at when we're curating the classes or the cohorts every year. For instance, in this year's program, we have someone who is in her late 40s, as well as someone who is a fresh graduate from university. So it's really not about the age, but it's about at what stage in their practice are they. You know, the artists kind of also know that when they're applying for the SEEF program or when they get nominated and then apply for the SEEF program, they kind of understand that they're at this stage in their practice where they haven't quite kind of, they don't have a grasp yet about it. They don't know kind of which direction they're heading, and need that community and that mentorship by the faculty to ground their practice. So it's really about kind of at what stage their work is at. It's the consistency of the work as well. For what purpose are they making work? Is it because they really want to make and produce and have these concepts that they want to share with the public? Or is it simply someone who just goes from one commission to the next because that is what an art practice is to them? So that's kind of how we've defined an emerging artist, is really about looking at their practice. And in terms of the dialogue that happens, I think that's one of the most beautiful things that we've seen take place, is when you have someone who is kind of more seasoned age-wise and someone who is, you know, very young and have just graduated university, and the sky is the limit for them. And just to see that mentorship happen, but at the same time at a very humble level. Even someone who's in their late 40s or mid 40s or late 30s, which are the different ages we've had in the program, they really don't come in with this attitude of, I know it all, or I've been there and I've done that. You really see everyone kind of looking at each other to support one another. And we've seen that happen kind of over the last 2 to 3 years, more than the first few years. Wa'fraء was part of a cohort that was created by just nominations from people who we reached out to from the community of gallerists, people who work in arts organizations. And as soon as they graduated, they became nominators. And then every cohort, when they graduate, also become nominators. And that's really where we've seen things change completely. And we've been introduced to artists whom I've never heard of before. And I said this before in another situation, but this year's cohort were most of them names that I had never heard of. And I felt bad because I thought, does that mean I don't know what's going on in the arts community? But then I thought, no, it's actually amazing, because it means that there was no way I was going to know about these artists had it not been for the past fellows connecting me with them and sending their names and saying, these are people who are worth looking at and worth being given a chance to participate in this program.
Can we help this person, and will this person help the other people that they're in their cohort with? And we've been extremely fortunate so far, and, you know, and that gets back to that idea of the fellows learning from one another, and that's just so much the kind of center of what we do.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on that, because that's very similar to how we work as well, and how you asked me, Manira, earlier, how we choose our participants. And, you know, we have an open call, and we ask everyone to respond to a certain theme with a project. And out of the hundreds of applications, we obviously first have to go through an initial kind of shortlist before we have judging panels. And what's really interesting is that when you are trying to curate a kind of a trip where we're all going to be traveling together, you have to make sure that that you have characters that work together. And so yes, sort of being what we think is sort of a talented artist is important, or a creative, but it's also what personalities are going to work together, you know. And as you were saying, Khulud, of having some more experienced artists with some less experienced artists, and they all learn from each other. You know, everyone has something to teach, and I think when you're taken out of your comfort zone and you're traveling and you're in a country where you can't speak the language sometimes, where, you know, you're not sleeping in your own bed, you're constantly moving around, that sort of humbles you. And I think everyone's just at the same level, and that's what works really beautifully on these journeys, is that you're all kind of starting from scratch, and you're all there to learn from each other and from the place you're in and from the sort of people giving workshops.
Any other questions from the audience? All right, great. If you guys have any other closing points you want to mention, otherwise we can wrap up. Yep. thank you very much for being on stage. This has been a wonderful discussion. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Munira.